So we've obtained the permission. Again, this comes from the chief engineer. He or she can't delegate that permission. It's got to come from him. And of course, if your MRG is open, it goes without saying that the captain has to know as well, even though that's not explicitly stated in the MRC. So a couple things, right? These are I think technically these are medium security locks. When they come out, we've seen on some ships where the shackle actually comes all the way out of the body. So just keep positive control over everything, because there's a couple pieces. So the shackle can come out of the body of the lock, the chain or the linkage that keeps the lock in place, that can come loose. Any part of this hinged assembly that locks the access cover to the casing, any part of that can come loose. You've got your locking pins here and the retention chain, but you've also got the hinge pins for this portion of the unit as well, and all of that could potentially be loose, especially because this is an infrequent check. Any of that can be loose. So as you're opening up everything, make sure that you're maintaining positive control on any moving pieces. That way it saves you the trouble of having to go bilge diving in order to secure those. Because without everything back in place, you can't leave this access cover. If there's any portion of the locking device or the braces in the cover itself that are not back in place, this access cover has to remain, a sailor has to stay with this access cover because it's still considered an open MRG without everything back in place. So we've loosened the bolts, the two bolts that secure the access cover. Now keep in mind that debris can actually come from opening up the access cover itself, whether that's flaking paint or deteriorated gasket. So even as you open it, you still have to be mindful of any sort of foreign object falling into the access cover. So with that, we're going to go ahead and pull this open. And again, we're going to watch down the sides, looking for any sort of frayed pieces of gasket. I wiped everything down, but there's still stuff that I couldn't get to until it's open. So we're going to go ahead and open this up, and then we'll take a look at what we have. We may actually wipe away from the access if there's debris right on the lip where the gasket's covering up. So that's the open casing. We're going to go ahead and drop our plexiglass in here just to minimize some of the oil leakage. I'm going to take one rag and just wipe around the lip here where the oil is starting to come out. And it may be hard to see, but there's a little bit of blackish oil, maybe residue from the gasket glue. So I'm going to go ahead and wipe that, see if I can get that. Make sure that's not loose. But you can see there's dirt in here as well that I'll wipe off. And you can see there's gasket material or gasket glue up here. Right, so that's some of the stuff that can be thawed. So when you're wiping with the cover open, you have to be very careful to wipe away from the opening itself. So what we're looking at now is we're checking the spray pattern. What you want is overlapping patterns from the two nozzles that are visible from this access cover. And what we see here is we have a good overlap. But as you go through and you look at the teeth on your MRG, anything that stands out to you is not like the rest of it. You need to get good pictures of it and send it to the NAVC rep to get an explanation and let the experts decide whether or not that sort of thing can become an issue or is an issue now. In most cases, they're not, but it's something that you want to have documented so that if anything ever were to happen, then they know that you took the right steps to get documentation on any sort of discrepancy like that. Now on this spray pattern, right? So this is exactly what you're looking for. You got that good overlap, and we mentioned that depending on the placement of the nozzles, you may not have that, but there's other things that would prevent it, things like clogged nozzles. If you had a muslin bag go through your lube oil system, or debris, excessive rust or corrosion, all of that can impede the flow of lube oil, and you may get a pattern that may have a gap in the middle of it or may not have that full coverage. So the MRC covers the procedure for actually removing those spray nozzles and cleaning them out or replacing them. So if you see that your spray pattern is not adequate or does not meet the requirements, then look further into the MRC and it tells you how to correct that problem. Going ahead, aye. So now we're rotating the gear, and what you're looking for here is that every tooth has a consistent oil film. So you want to make sure that the spray pattern's doing what it's doing, but then in that rotation, you want to make sure that that's carrying the oil on every tooth. And so see here, now you can see, on these bottom gear, you can see the different color of paint, and they use that again to gauge the wear, to make sure, to gauge the wear on those teeth. You'll see there's red and blue down here. Here comes the red. And then unpainted teeth, and then there'll be red and blue. And that's what they use to make sure that those teeth are meshing evenly. And that if there is wear, you want that wear to be even across the face, and you can see that it is. And again, if this is your first time opening up your MRG, or the first time it's been opened up for a while, I would take pictures of any wear in that paint. That way, if you do it during the next evolution, next time you open it, you can compare the wear in the first picture to the new wear. There shouldn't be much, but anything you do, especially with smartphones and ships having access to cameras, you want to make sure everything is as well documented as you can. But again, don't sacrifice risking dropping your iPhone inside the MRG to get your good picture. Make sure everything's lanyard off. But for the chief engineer and the top snipe, you want to make sure that every time you open this, you document everything you see. And the best way to do that is with pictures. So again, you're just looking to make sure there's no dry spots, no areas that oil isn't getting to. And you can see your different sensors in here, so you do have wires and nuts and bolts. So you want to take a look at that while you have it open and make sure you don't see any frayed wire, any exposed conductor, bolts that may be missing one of those lock nuts. You're taking a look at everything you see in here, and you can see the inside of the casing. You're looking for corrosion on there. Again, this all looks very good, very clean. So in any class, when they talk about the MRG, they talk about that oil mist that builds up, and that's the whole reason you have to have the vent fog precipitator. And you can see that clearly here in the light of the flashlight. You can see that all that oil becomes a mist that floats throughout the entire casing, and that's why that can become so flammable, is because of that oil mist. So if you haven't seen it, or if you haven't been able to explain it, an open MRG is a great way to illustrate that. And you can see that again in the beam of that flashlight. That's that fog that the vent fog precipitator is created to mitigate. You can see it here. I don't want to start pulling it off because I don't want it to become FOD, but you can see it could use a little bit of cleaning up. We're not going to do that. But so you're looking for pieces. If it pulls off easily, I say remove it, but you don't want to just start unraveling anything. So we'll leave it in place because it's all, even though it's a little out of place, it's all tight. So we're not going to peel it off at all. Even that sticks out a little bit, it's still tight and secure, so we're not going to pull on it. And what that does is it keeps the gasket in place. You're also looking for any sort of nicks or cuts in that gasket. And you can see, I'm not sure if the camera is going to pick it up or not, but you can see there's a little bit of a split in this gasket right here. And it looks like that might have come by, there's an impression there, so it looks like something may have hit that and compressed it and actually split that gasket. So it's not bad enough necessarily to mandate replacing it if you don't have the material, but certainly if you have the material, there's a NAVC procedure that tells you what the material is and what the gasket adhesive is that's right to use, and you could actually replace this gasket because of this cut. No nicks, again, a little bit of gasket adhesive. You always want to be really careful when you do that. It's important to put the right amount of adhesive on there so that when it does compress, because these are tightened down, you want to make sure it doesn't squeeze out like this, or that if it does, you come back later and clean it all up. So you can see there's some gasket glue on here. No nicks that I see. You can see that it's not fully adhered, which is fine as long as it's staying in place. And you also want to see if it's an old gasket, if maybe it's the original gasket, if it's been over tightened or tightened unevenly, you may get some impressions in some areas and not in the others. And you can see that here, where you can see where the seating surface is actually bit into this gasket a little bit. So just like a watertight door gasket, the old black gasket used to get squeezed or compressed too much, and then you'd have to replace it. And the same thing here, right? Similar gasket material where if it's old or over tightened, you're going to see that impression. So those are the only two things I see. That one split, again, that's right here. Get my fingers out of the way. You got the one split here, and then a little bit of compression in the gasket itself, neither of which would warrant replacing the whole thing. But something to keep in mind, and that's why you always want to have gasket material on hand, just in case you see something like that or something worse. But you can see we removed the surface rust. I've got the rag with the clean oil, and we just want to make sure that there's an oil film. Not that it wouldn't take long to get an oil film built up, but we want to just make sure anywhere that we've rubbed down, we want to put back that oil film. So not only am I getting a little bit more rust off of there, but the rag had oil on it, clean oil. So it's putting that film of oil back over the metal, and that'll help slow down the surface corrosion. And of course, that corrosion is always going to be worse anytime you've had some sort of grinding or weld. So where those pins are welded in, that's where you're going to get some of that surface rust as well, or surface corrosion. And again, so it picks up a little bit more, and it wipes the whole thing with oil. You're not going to prevent the corrosion, you just want to minimize it. Again, taking advantage of looking at everything you can while you have it open. So we're going to go ahead and reverse the process to lock everything back down, making sure all of your lanyards are out of the way, making sure that every lanyard has the tool that it was tied to still attached. You got your MRG keys, your wrenches, your sockets, your flashlight, your one tethered rag. We ended up not having to use that because, again, there was no reason to actually go into the casing. If one of the nozzles were clogged or if one of them needed to be cleaned up, we could have done that, and we would have used that tethered rag. We've confirmed that we have everything that we started with outside of the MRG still, so nothing's been in. You saw my hands never broke the plane. My hands nor the flashlight never broke the plane of the access cover. So I'm confident nothing came off of my person and fell in there. So we're going to go ahead. You can see the retaining pin. This keeps the access cover in the upright position to prevent it from falling, even though it's slanted back. You always want to have that in place. Plus, it keeps that pin from dangling, because you can see it will actually dangle inside the MRG. So you always want to keep that in place. We're going to go ahead and pull that. We'll remove the plexiglass. Nothing in the MRC or any of the maintenance talks about this plexiglass cover. I learned it from one of my sailors. It's just a great way. It allows us to view and to bring, ESWAS candidates and SWO candidates down to look at the MRG when it's open without an immediate risk of fodding that MRG. And for us, it's our safety measure, so we're not wearing those non-vented goggles. But it's a great way to do your access, to do your inspection, and get good visibility on there without spraying that oil and causing that hazard. So we're going to remove that. We're going to pull the pin. We're going to lower this cover. I'll take and I'll wipe with a clean rag. I'll wipe around the gasket surface one more time. This has all been cleaned up. We'll close it down. We'll put those bolts in place and we'll lock it back up.
So once you remove it out, I'll pull the pin on the top for you.
Okay. So for that gasket surface, I want a clean rag. So it still has oil in it, but it's folded over, so I'm using that clean surface because it is going to be the last thing that touches the access. And again, always be mindful to wipe away from the opening. And here, this is just housekeeping. I just don't want the oil drips. Keep that rag clear. And again, we're going to let that come all the way down. And so as you're working with your tools, when you have that access open, it's important to be aware of where you're putting them all. So if we had those wrenches up above it, when we opened it, when we close this cover, anything that we had sitting up above it, even though that may have been a convenient place, of course, all of that would have fallen down. So, and you can see we just got some, from the runoff of the spray, off of that plexiglass, we just got a little bit of lube oil down here. So that sort of housekeeping is important anytime you're opening equipment, but especially, of course, on the MRG. So even with this down, everything's still lanyard. All those safety precautions are still in place. And just like anything else, you want to tighten them down evenly so that you don't pinch or squeeze that gasket in the way to break that seal. Most of these systems are set up so that you can't back that nut or washer all the way off, but be careful, because you don't know if yours is until you're in the middle of the process. So loosen them as much as you need to, but there's no reason to take them all the way back. All right, so those are tight. There's a lock pin back here, and that's what allows you to bring that lock pin on both sides. And that allows you to bring it all the way down. And then our key. There we go. So again, make sure it's secured. And of course, the opening and closing of the MRG, even if it's individual access covers, that is a required log entry. So anytime your MRGs, when you unlock it, I'd have it, or when you're ready to unlock it, I'd have it make an entry. And you can either do it by cover, or just assume it's open the entire time. But always keep a good log of when this is open and when it's locked back. So what we showed you was the access and procedures for opening one inspection cover. if you're doing the entire MRC for inspecting all of your nozzle patterns, and you're going to do that same procedure on every single one of them. So you could either map it out or just go by the bearing number. So you can see that for this access cover, this we would go by bearing 21 and 22. Right, and then the one above it you can see is 15 and 16. So you can identify them that way, or you can do whatever system works for you to keep track of which ones you've looked at and which ones you haven't. But that the procedure and the requirements are the same whether you're opening one or you're opening them all. So for any MRG inspection I've done, it takes more time in the prep work, deciding, roping off the area, doing your inventory, getting all your equipment done, doing all the tape up, getting everything ready, all your lanyards tied off, doing all of that actually takes more time than opening the access cover, doing the visual inspection, and closing that cover back up. But that's the most important part. All that prep work prevents the headache or minimizes the headache of any damage resulting from you accessing your MRG. And you can see on this side alone, looks like there's seven covers here, and then there'd be 7 covers on the other side. Now they're all going to look a little different. Your spray patterns may be different, but the MRC and the tech manual talk about what the requirements are. So those are your guides. They don't all have to look the same. You go by the documentation. A couple things that will be different is the lower you are in the MRG, the heavier the oil flow is going to be, because that's closer to your sump. That's where all the oil from above is all draining down to those lower access covers. So you're going to see heavier oil flow down below, and then up above, you're actually going to, if you do have surface corrosion on the inside of the casing, you're going to see that more prevalently in the higher access covers. So because that's the part that's the top of the MRG inside, it'll have an oil film in it, but it never gets any sort of direct spray or any sort of oil flow. Whereas everywhere else, there's always a chance you're going to get oil contact or oil coverage, because all that oil is coming up through the nozzles and then either being sprayed down or running down the inside. But on those upper access covers, that's where you may see surface rust that's thick enough to run your fingers through. On my MRG that had been flooded with seawater, we had 4-inch rust stalactites on the top of the MRG, and we actually got a cleaning procedure from NAVC to go in there with lint-free rags and collect all of that, and do as much manual cleaning as we could, and then what we couldn't wrench or what we couldn't get out with just using our hands and rags and wipers, everything inventoried, of course. What we couldn't do, then we just kept cycling oil through until we got good samples. You can expect to see some surface corrosion. Document it, send it to your NAVC rep, talk to your port engineer, talk to your N4, and make sure you get it cleared for operation at the right level. That's the most important part. You can do some cleanup on your own, but anything that's going to be extensive, talk to NAVC and get a procedure and get an expert down here. All right, they're the ones who know all the ins and outs of these. We're sort of the maintainers, but they know them like the back of their hand. So that's what you want to. If you do see anything out of the ordinary, you want to make sure you document it and that it gets the right level of visibility.